All right, let's move on to our first story, which is about our very own Christian Brown. A lot of news has come in the last couple of days on extensions for other first round picks, and we're probably going to get even more of that news, today. And extensions for other players I would like to sort of talk about as not necessarily comps, but can help anchor our discussion about what Christian's extension is probably going to look like. On our last show, CT and I talked about the comments by John and Ben about how they view Christian as part of the core of the team. They really value him and they'd like to get something done. They didn't really discuss the terms. That's normal. They're not going to talk about like what their starting negotiation position is going to be in a press conference. So Christian is extension eligible starting July 1st. That is tomorrow, along with the entire 2022 first rounders who are going to be extension eligible starting then. Not everybody in that class is going to get extended, first of all, at all. And even if they do, they won't necessarily be extended this summer. Some of them will go to restricted free agency probably next summer. And we see at least like one or two players go to restricted free agency every summer. We might see a lot more of them this year because teams are sort of trying to perhaps squeeze more out of guys under the new CBA. We will see. Maybe teams are just using the sort of threat of restricted free agency to try to get better deals for those same players this summer. But I wanted to put that date out there because Jokic becomes extension eligible for his 3-year extension that a lot of people talked about after last week's press conference where Josh Kroenke sort of made the comments that like, oh my God, if we went into the second apron, there'd be a situation where we might have to think about trading Jokic, but they don't want to do that. And that's why we don't want to think about the second apron. We're not going to rehash that argument. But Jokic is extension eligible this summer. Will we see a Christian Brown extension before the day that Jokic is extension eligible, regardless of if you think Jokic will actually sign his extension this summer? Even if you agree Jokic isn't signing his extension this summer, that's fine. They're still going to present it to him, and they can't present it to him, at least technically, until July 8th. There's a sort of convention of like, you got to get like these guys done first, right? Last year, we had to wait for Jamal Murray's contract to get done first before AG's, even though like maybe Jamal's was like more up in the air. So it's not really about like the way that things are prioritized in time isn't necessarily about how certain you are that it's going to happen, right? So you might be more uncertain about Jokic's, but it's like, well, we got to like at least present Jokic's and like get the answer first before we proceed with, Christian Brown's extension. Or because Christian is a top 21 pick in his draft class and probably just in terms of where he was drafted, I think he's well above that considering the number of busts that came out of that draft as well. Are we going to see his extension news probably coming within the first couple of days of free agency alongside all the other first rounders that are extension eligible before it's even time for Jokic to be extension eligible?
I think we could see it before. I mean, what Jokic is going to be at more or less. Like even if he waits a year, you should know what that's going to be around. And I think you can evaluate CB's percentage of the cap, whatever you want to do, in line with whatever Jokic is going to be at. I don't know how free agency will affect that. Like, do you see what signings we're going to be able to make affecting the CB extension at all?
None. No. Yeah. Nothing that Denver is able to, because Christian's extension wouldn't even kick in until 26, 27. He still has one year left in his rookie deal either way. Maybe you're right. They're working on trying to fill out the roster spots first, and then they'll work on...
I don't know. I'm feeling better about the Christian extension. I know people are nervous about giving... he's like one of our cost-controlled players, but I definitely felt more relaxed about it when I was listening to Ryan talk about it and how it's like 18% of the cap is around where he'll be 18 to 20 in years down the line. It won't be as expensive as it sounds, at least the number of like 30 million. But we are going to go over some of the extensions that have been coming out and talking about how that relates to Christian. Warney Anderson from the chat says he thinks that deal Jabari got should be just about what he expects for CB.
Yeah, we're gonna go over that. So I wanted to talk about a few extensions that happened in the last couple of days, or announcements of them, that could help anchor some of our discussion around Christian. Naz Reid extended for 5 years, $125 million with the Minnesota Timberwolves. I reacted to live on the show last Friday. After I sort of digested it, it made sense. Like, I was surprised that the Wolves went with that long of a deal for Naz. To be clear, his agent is the agent of a lot of Denver Nuggets that have gotten sort of similar, very favorable deals. Jeff Schwartz of Excel Management. Will, when you saw that Naz was extending with the Wolves, were you disappointed?
Yeah, I was disappointed. I didn't want Naz to be back there. I wanted him to go somewhere else and get some huge overpay from some other team. I think he's really good, but versus the Nuggets, I don't think he holds Jokic as much as everyone says. So I'm ultimately fine with it. I just want someone from the Wolves to leave. Like if Na would leave.
Well, it looks like that Nikhil is going to be the main sort of casualty of the second apron here, because they can't afford to give him more than a minimum. And I'm pretty sure he's going to get more than that in free agency. They can't afford to give it more than the minimum if they want to stay under the second apron, I should say. Naz is getting a 5-year deal, $25 million a year. How would you rate Christian versus Naz Reid as players, just in terms of impact? Because obviously they've had different roles, especially over the last year, where Naz sort of continues to be Minnesota's sixth man. And I actually thought with the size of this deal, it was a signal that he was going to be starting. But then we got the Julius Randle extension news also. So it looks like he's still not going to be starting, but maybe he doesn't care anymore because he got his contract. Versus Christian, who was obviously starting all year this year. When I saw that extension, I saw the number, I was sort of like, oh, that's something that's at least in the ballpark of where I sort of envisioned Christian the annual number for Christian's extension to be. But I hadn't thought of Naz Reid as a comp in terms of like players that make comparable impact. So I wanted to know where you were on that.
It is hard to compare in some sense. There's different players, different roles, different pecking order in some sense. Like Naz hasn't been a de facto starter for the Wolves in the way that the Nuggets have committed to Christian being a starter, though I think Naz is good enough to be a starter in the league for sure. But like he's like a big guy and he has the 3-point shot, which to me brings the value for me above Christian a little bit, just for that fact alone. Christian has to play a different kind of defense, and his role on the team and the way we depend on him for some perimeter defense and some wing stopping is pretty important next to Jokic, and he does need to get better. I don't know if I feel worse about where Christian is defensively than Naz, just for like the amount we have to depend on CB, if that makes sense.
I see what you mean.
Yeah.
Right. One of the things that I thought when I first saw this deal was, okay, I guess Julius is out, or he's going to take his player option, and maybe Minnesota at the latest tries to trade him at the trade deadline, just as an expiring contract, because they're making this long-term and pretty big money commitment to Naz, who's now making starter money. Like, there's no really other way to put that. But then they extended Julius. So my original thought was, okay, Naz's production and impact is going to be under a different kind of scrutiny once he's a starter. But I don't even know when that's going to be at this point, because of just how how their forward situation, their center forward situation is currently arranged alongside their cap sheet. But that was my thought, and it made me wonder, like, I don't think that Christian's overall impact is that far off from Nas,
I
even
probably
though like
agree.
he doesn't have as big of like there's like Christian just does a lot of little things on the floor that I think he just knows how to play,
I love
that I
watching
think.
Christian play. Like I really do.
Right. That start to, in addition to obviously the transition finishing and all of that, like really great, regular season player. But even in the playoffs, like especially when he steps up his defensive game, that that changes things a lot. I just think he's very disciplined, and that sort of stuff maybe starts to eliminate the gap in terms of just clearly Naz is the way more skilled offensive player. Nobody is arguing that, right? When you look at Naz's contract, because I want to start talking about these things again as percentages of the salary cap. The first year of his deal, it actually starts at like 21 million, and then it's like ascending from there. So it averages out to 25 million a year, but it's like 21 in the first year and it escalates up to 28 million. So we don't have to think too much about that, but I think that first year figure is important because like in Denver's case, because of the situation they're going to be in once Christian's deal kicks in at the same time as AG's new extension kicks in at the same time as we're in the second year of Jamal's max extension. We're in the at that point, fourth year of Jokic's max extension, et cetera. But Naz's deal is currently at around 14% of the salary cap. So let's talk about Jabari Smith Jr.'s extension by contrast. So this came out just yesterday, where Jabari Smith Jr. signs a 5-year, $122 million rookie extension. So his deal will be kicking in the same time that Christian's is whenever we find out whatever that deal is, which is next year. This one very much surprised me, Will. So similar player to Naz in that he can sort of be a starter for this Houston Rockets team. Jabari obviously much younger. Although Naz is actually not that old. I think he's only a couple years older than Christian. But this past year has been playing the role of the sixth man ever since Amen Thompson's ascent to the starting lineup and his impact. And like I was looking at the impact metrics for Amen over the last year. Like that kid's trajectory is actually kind of scary. I'm talking like Anthony Edwards kind of scary. But yeah, Jabari was sort of relegated to the bench in the wake of all of that happening. Still a good player. I thought he was really good for them in the playoffs, but here he is getting a contract that averages out to I think 24.4
yeah,
million a year. And so a figure in terms of average amount just under what Naz is getting, but that's money that like normally a starter would get. Unlike Naz, though, you're in a situation in Houston where they just traded away 2 starters to get Kevin Durant, and so there is a starting spot available for him to leap into and start to leap back into that starting role and start to, make that level of impact. And so I just thought that was an interesting sort of 2 contracts that came in close time that are similar amount. I'll ask you the same question that I did with Naz. Where do you see Christian's impact and potential? Because now we're talking about 2 players in the same draft class around the same age relative to Jabari Smith Jr., who went third in that class.
Jabari, because he was third, almost is underperforming. And,
well, he's not. That's the thing is he's not getting paid like he hadn't underperformed. He's getting paid like, okay, you've got the draft pedigree of a third overall pick, but you haven't quite gotten there yet.
That's what I'm saying. So Christian, he did contribute, I guess, to our championship because that was a tough thing to come in as a rookie and play in that situation, and then took over KCP's role as a starter. Like he's definitely done a lot that warrants getting paid. As much as like I want him on a cheap contract for the Nuggets to be good for our whole team, CB's done more than Jabari. Percentage-wise and just number-wise, I think Christian's probably going to get more than that just by nature of what he's already done.
So I like that you're thinking about the like what's the contrast here between these two. So a lot of people talk about, like I just mentioned, draft pedigree, right? Christian is a first round pick. Obviously didn't go quite as high as Jabari, and I think that there's a bigger gap between like where Christian was drafted in terms of draft pedigree and that sort of equity that exists there, and where Jabari was then between Christian and Andrew Nembhard. And it's not just because of numerically 21 is closer to 31 than 3. You could look at Andrew Nembhard in terms of like progression and impact to the team and like what he's done. Now, the Pacers didn't win the championship. Andrew Nembhard, not technically a first round pick. He went 31st. He went right after Peyton Watson in 2022. Andrew Nembhard's contract is a bit less than both Jabari and Naz, even though like he was kind of in a 6-man role for Indiana last year for half the year, then moved into the starting lineup, and then this year he's a full-time starter. So I would sort of comp him in terms of like these players have like done similar amounts of things within the league, more so than like Christian to Jabari. Do you think that's a good comp?
I just think Nembhard is really good. Like I would,
no, I agree.
I would pay Nembhard more than Christian if I like had to, in a vacuum, delineate money for their value.
I agree with that, and I think it's because of the creation upside. Although Andrew Nembhard is a little bit older than Christian, but anyway, Andrew Nembhard already got his extension last year. He signed his extension because he was a second round pick. The Pacers were able to decline his team option on the last year of his deal and say, look, we're going to pay you maybe a little bit less than we think you'll be worth on an annual basis. But the trade-off is you get to start your second contract early, which means you start making more than, I think, in the $5 to $6 million range per year. Now he's making 18, 19, $20 million per year on average. His next contract this upcoming season is going to be for $18 million. So unlike Christian, like Denver doesn't have that option with Christian because he was not a second round pick. So it's just kind of like, damn it. Indiana got like the sort of best of both worlds in that sense. But if you wanted to use Andrew's contract as a comp for where Christian's going to be, that's one where he's making just under 12% of the cap next year. Okay, the last thing about Christian specifically that I wanted to cover on this is obviously like Naz and Jabari both get 5-year deals, and that sort of enables the team to try to get something done for maybe less in annual value than another team might have given him on a shorter deal. So for example, if Naz was like, well, I think the Pistons would give me $30 million in a sign-in trade, but the Wolves are like, well, we can't do that because we're trying to stay on their second apron, but we can give you another year guaranteed. This is the way that these negotiations go, right? I thought it was really interesting that Jabari's agent wasn't able to get a player option on the end of his deal because he is such a young player. He's going to be on even if he stays like the level of player that he is or only improves like very marginally over the next few years, he's making basically fifth starter on a good team, like good fifth starter money now. And because of the way that the cap is going up over the next few years, that's going to be just a really cheap deal by the last year of his contract. And he's probably going to be underpaid in the last, again, with only marginal improvements, the last like 3 years of that deal, that's going to look like really sweet for Houston. So I think that was a really good, like shrewd move by Houston to get the contract structure that they did with Jabari. I got to get your thoughts on this, Will. How would you feel given to me, a long-term deal signals institutional commitment to that player. That's not a deal that you're going to be looking to get off of for at least the first 2 to 3 seasons. This is like a player that you want for your system. How would you feel about Christian getting a 5-year deal as opposed to, I think, otherwise everyone expects that if he gets extended this summer, it's going to be a 4-year deal. Having that sort of on the books, like, with the imbued with the meaning that I just said, or do you feel differently about long-term contracts?
I'm not sure how I feel about the difference of like the 5-year versus like the 4-year player option or team option thing that Calvin Booth has done. I don't know. I don't really care if it's a 5-year deal versus 4-year.
Okay.
Personally,
you're just like, I just want to lock our guys up. And
I'm not in my mind thinking of signings and ways we're going to improve the team is like in substitution for CB. So I'm like, fine, re-signing and extending CB because it's just going to happen eventually. Like he's not going to be on his first contract. You're going to have to accept it. I think he's proved he's a starter. He's going to earn the money, but I just hope that he improves. If you give the 5-year deal and he's not giving us what we need in terms of the defense and shooting, why couldn't you move him even if you gave him the 5-year deal? Just because it's too long of a contract and he'd be diminished?
It's not that you couldn't. It's that if you got to a point in the first 2 years of that contract that you want to move him already, then he's probably not playing up to it, and it's long. It's not that you couldn't move it. You'd have to attach assets to move it. And it's like, it's not a positive asset.
Do you think that 18% of the cap to 20% of the cap, and they had to trade him in a year or two, you think that would make him almost untradeable?
No, I'm okay with a 5-year deal as long as the number justifies it. Like, it's like, okay, I think the only reason to do a 5-year deal for if you're Denver is because you got the annual number down to something that allows you flexibility. My cap, I think, is 25 million a year, which is it's going to be 14% of the cap. If you're giving him 5 years, I want to be well under 25. Like, I want to be at 22 would make me very happy. 23, I'm like, okay, I'm content with that. But if you're going over 23, it's 4 years. Like, 25 is like what I do if it's a 4-year deal with like a team option on the last year. And I don't see Christian like getting or like taking a deal that has a team option on the last year. That's why I don't even like the number the 25 mil a year. So the salary cap went up 10% this year. The new CBA actually caps the annual amount that the salary cap can increase by to 10%. But Bobby Marks just tweeted this out a few minutes ago. Sources confirmed to ESPN that the salary cap in 26-27 is projected to increase 7%. There is less money, at least projected as of right now, flowing into the system than a lot of people thought. And for those high-paying teams, that is a big, big problem. Because the difference in 10% increase versus a 7% increase in the salary cap given the current numbers is like another roster spot because it's like over a vet minimum. That's the thing is like I need Denver to be more shrewd in these negotiations. Like don't give them the annual number and the 5 years and the player option. Like there has to be some give and take somewhere like from Denver's perspective. It's not like throw the whole, boat at these guys. It doesn't really quite make sense. So all right. We appreciate you guys for hanging out with us. If you like our content, please remember to hit the like button and subscribe and hit the notification bell and leave us a review. We're on Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music, although I think the audio for this one is probably going to take a while to get up there. Our social links are all in the description for both our personal socials and the show socials. And always remember, people, winning is fun and losing sucks.